The Kansas State School for the Blind presents Kansas Comms Chat, Mary Tellefson and Bill Kaler, October 20th, 2023. A Zoom screen shows 11 participants. Welcome, Kansas Comms. Thank you for joining us today. We have Mary Tellefson and Bill Kaler with us. I'm going to read their bios really quickly, and then we'll let them get started. Mary Tellefson, a retired TSBI in comms, has taught sighted and visually impaired children in public and residential school settings for over 40 years and holds licenses in 5 educational disciplines through the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Teacher of the visually impaired, orientation and mobility specialist, director of curriculum instruction, K through 12 principal and elementary education. She served as the statewide O&M consultant at the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired Outreach Department for 15 years. Mary has created and taught multiple professional development and university level courses, held offices in state and national professional organizations, and has published works in peer-reviewed journals. She recently published 2 children's chapter books through Orange Hat Publishing featuring main characters who are blind, 2 Canes on the Tundra and Blooming Besties. That sounds cute. Currently in the process of publication through Austin Macaulay Publishers is Culturally Responsive Orientation and Mobility Career, College, and Community Readiness Standards. Bill Kaler, retired TSBI in comms, has 45 years experience working with early childhood family education through age 22 plus learners with visual impairments. Sorry, I had to let somebody else in, including those with multiple disabilities, their families, and teachers. Itinerant TSBI O&M, administrator in public schools, and principal superintendent of special schools for blind in 4 states, New York, Texas, Wisconsin, and Arizona. Wow. Extensive research, analysis, publications, and presentations on evidence-based topics directly related to long-standing issues in the field. Standards assessment-driven O&M services, considerations for instructional time, effectiveness of various instructional setting for O&M instruction, risk assessment and liability for O&M instructors, caseload analysis for TVIs and comms, in-depth analysis of role, responsibilities, and functions for the TVI, rethinking the expanded core curriculum with emphasis on a focused core curriculum, research-based, peer-reviewed standards for orientation and mobility, programs and services for children with visual impairment and neurologically degenerative conditions, design and implementation of special programming and addressing disability-specific skills for children with visual impairment. He remains involved teaching graduate-level university classes as TVI and continuing research projects, especially relating to alternatives for teacher training and standards in the field of visual impairment. So we welcome you and thank you for joining our Kansas Comms group. And I want to give special thanks to Dee McDougald for bringing you to us today. So today, Mary and Bill will present, and they'll follow up by answering some questions. They want to keep it really casual. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and I will jump in and interrupt here. So I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. And I must say, Bill, that was quite a long bio. Do we even have any time left?
Most people say that guy can't keep a job.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having us. Comms are our favorite people in the world. Do you want to say anything introductory, Bill, while I start to share my screen?
Oh, we're happy to be here, and we are so pleased to be able to share this resource. It's having been in the field, both of us, for as long as we have, we know it's long past time for us to have this type of resource in our field, which will give us an opportunity to generate good evidence-based research rather than just kind of what I do or kind of what you do. This will give us some standing, I think, in the field. Doesn't take away anything from what we've done, and there certainly are many hardworking people in the field, but I think, as you will see part of this presentation, having a standards-based approach now will give us even more credibility and hopefully will help you deliver those services to the kids that we all share responsibility for.
So we really are excited about this because the standards bring our profession into the 21st century. We've had standards-based model of education since what year, Bill?
2000.
Yeah. and it has taken this long for us to kind of have our own standards. So it's really important at first to understand what standards do and what they don't do, because there is confusion out there about what standards are, and certainly even the term standards is used differently in different professions. So we just want to clarify at the beginning here what standards do and how they help kids. So first of all, they define what students should know and be able to do at graduation. They're based on typical development, which a lot of people have questioned in the past. Bill, do you want to comment on that?
Well, part of it is if we're expecting, and as you will know, because most of you are working with children in public schools, that's where the vast majority of children are educated, is in public schools. And we believe it's important to understand what are the travel expectations for any child at age and grade level that allows us then to match our instructional practices to bring children to or approximate to those levels of their peer, either age or grade level peers. So if we don't understand what the expectations are for travel for those kids, then it leaves our expectations foggy, cloudy, and certainly subject to a lot of subjectivity and inconsistency in our work. So we're believing that the standards gives us a baseline for operation, and just like any other content area, math or reading, as you see on this picture, we work within that as we adjust instruction to meet the needs of an individual child. But at least we know where we're going, and we can tell people where we're going. And that's not an O&M term, that's an outcome term.
Thank you. Standards justify what we do, why we do it, and what it takes to do it, to do our job. And we're going to hear some video clips of instructors who've been using the standards in their practice and some of the differences it has made in their daily practice. As Bill said, standards provide consistency in measurement of proficiency. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because the standards have really clearly articulated learner proficiency definitions, so that we're all using the same definitions. When some instructor says, yeah, that child or that learner is independent, what does that mean? Because rarely does it really mean independent and safe. So standards are used as a reference point for planning and teaching and learning programs and for assessing student progress. In this slide, we have Kimmy, who we interviewed after she'd been using the standards in her practice, and we're just going to let her tell it like it is.
So I was introduced to the standards when I took Mary's class at PSU. I was in her O&M for Children's class. And so that was the first time, I started as a TVI, and we don't really have evidence-based standards. A lot of it is, just functional. And in going into IEPs, and you see everyone else's, standards-based assessments, and you're coming in with, well, he looked this way or he did this. It kind of is a little off-putting for parents sometimes. So having these O&M standards made me very confident going into meetings because I can put that in the assessment. I use the career college and community readiness standards. I use the career college and community readiness standards, and everyone's like, oh, what is that? So I think it gives O&M a leg up in the sense that we're taken a little more seriously, especially from what I've noticed personally. A lot of people don't know what we do. You say O&M and they'll be like, M&M, what is that? So it really just kind of helps explain what we do and the importance of it. And it's not just street crossings, it's not just walking with a cane. It's a whole field. And yeah, just seeing that compared to working as a TVI, I think it's just, it's amazing that we even have this.
All right, I'm trying to forward the slide.
I use
Oops,
the
sorry.
college and community readiness standards, and everyone's like, oh, what is that?
Bill, if you want to kind of recap here while I try to get to the next slide. I don't know why it won't go.
I was introduced to the standards when I took Mary's class in at PSU. We're taken a little more seriously, especially from what I've noticed personally. And so that was the first time, you know, I started at
Both videos are playing. There you go. Okay.
So we wrote down all of your questions, and we do want to address them in the context of a curriculum map or a standards-based education. And so we won't go through all your questions right here, but we are going to be using that table, the curriculum map, because that's how standards are developed. Typically, the standards-based curriculum will be a top-down process, starting with the vision at the top, then all the way down to instruction. But because our field is already well established, when writing the standards, there was a lot of backwards chaining that I did to plug in all the knowledge that we already have in our field. So I'm trying to get rid of my own picture on my screen. There we go, so that I can see what the slide says.
Mary, an additional question just popped up just in
Yep.
case we'll go through it. It says writing impact statements related to O&M present levels.
I'm not, say that again, please.
It says writing impact statements related to O&M present levels. So how to write those impact statements related to O&M present levels. Is that right, Anna?
Yes. In the IEPs, we have to write an impact statement as to how the disability impacts their progress in the curriculum. And we've been getting some pushback about how we're writing those currently.
Oh, well, we do have a slide on the IEP process, and I wonder if that's the best place that Bill can address that question. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Is that okay with everybody?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. The vision in a standards-based education model is that overarching, what do we want kids to be able to do? What do we want them to know? How will they function in society? How do we know that they are ready for career, college, and community? And while we as a profession might talk about what we know our vision is, oftentimes the general public does not understand. So the vision is articulated in this slide, and it's in the book, so we aren't going to go through all of it, but just know that these are the skills that would show that our learners are ready for career, college, and community. From that vision, then, you build your performance standards and your domains. Now, when you look through our professional literature, not every resource will even have the same domains. That's one of the things I found when I was doing the research. So I landed on this from a document from Canada that had these 5 standards, or 5 performance standards, and then the accompanying domains. So if there is anything that you do in orientation and mobility that does not fit into one of these standards or domains, then the standards aren't good enough. But I don't think you will find anything that you do that isn't represented in one of the performance standards. Concept development, sensory development, orientation and mapping, formal and travel techniques, communication, personal safety, and advocacy. And I forgot to ask Menli, is there anybody in our crowd that isn't able to see the screens so that I need to describe what's on each one?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Okay,
Well,
Well-
will you send me a private chat if you are having trouble and need help? But I think we're okay.
okay, thank you.
Oh, and Mary, another question.
Yeah.
Are we going to get a copy of your PowerPoint?
I will send you one, yes.
Okay.
I'll probably take the videos out of it, however,
Sure.
unless somebody says, oh, please don't do that. Okay, so after you have your performance standards and your domains, those are broken down into age, grade level performance targets. So these standards have performance targets at the end of age 24 months, end of age 4, end of grade 9, or age 9, grade 3, age 13, grade 7, and then the end of the school experience, age 18 to 21. And if you are following those age, grade level performance targets, you are automatically on the road to the standards. That's what the benchmarks and performance indicators do. They keep you at age, grade level expectations along the road to the standards, which then fulfill the vision. Anything you want to add to that, Bill?
No, that's good.
From there, when you assess your learner according to those age targets, and you find out whether they are at age level or perhaps there's a gap and they're below grade level or age level, that's the assessment that we need in order to build our curriculum. Now, curriculum is different than standards, and the resources that we use are different than the standards. So curriculum is based on the assessment that you've done towards those benchmarks. They're culturally relevant. They use the peer group as the comparison to not only what kids should know and be able to do, but what are appropriate skills to be teaching. So for instance, if I'm in a Yupik village in Alaska, where they have only boardwalks and no streets and no cars, the curriculum that I'm developing for the kids is going to be based on what their peers need, based on their culture. So I'm not going to teach them roundabouts because there are no roundabouts. So that's how we keep, that's why these standards are culturally responsive, because it always uses the peer analog or the peer group to make comparisons. Curriculum is typically sequentially planned. It uses modifications, adaptations, alternative goals. Now, when we talk about the resources that we have out there, for instance, the TAPS is a curriculum based on what is taught at the School for the Blind in Texas. So for instance, their curriculum is going to have campus travel, but I'm not going to teach campus travel in Alaska, in that Yupik village. So curriculum is really individualized to the performance targets of the student that's been assessed, and it's individualized.
And it's individualized to their environment where they are.
Right. And so I'm reading this last bullet point. It's often influenced by local needs, consumers, post-graduation research, universities, and training programs. It can be influenced from the outside as well as from the inside, and that's just something to know. So for instance, when I sent what I had written out to people in Wisconsin to get some feedback, Somebody said, how come you don't have bus travel until such and such an age? Our kids in Milwaukee take the bus to school starting in kindergarten. So that would be an example of a difference in curriculum needs. Then from your curriculum, of course, you have your instructional plan. We have so much good stuff in our field when it comes to instruction. We have some great resources, and we have our gurus, some in cortical visual impairment, some in traumatic brain injury, and that information that comes from them fits in at the instructional level. The standards do not tell you which cane to use. The standards do not tell you when to start cane travel. Those are instructional decisions. Standards are not going to tell you if you should do sleep shade training. That's based on what the instructor knows about the student, the curriculum that they're working on, and that is individualized. So while some might say, well, I've gotten some pushback about why certain strategies are not specifically mentioned in the standards. It's because that's not what standards are. That happens at the instructional level. Bill?
It's a good point there, because oftentimes we will hear that parents come into an IEP meeting and insist on a particular intervention. That could be, for example, children with autism, the ABA interventions. That's a methodology. That's a methodology that the decision is made at the teacher level rather than an IEP team level. Much the same with, is it a mandate that we use sleep shades? That's a methodology. There's a certain thought process behind it, but we don't mandate that through the standards. The standards are looking at the outcomes. The road to the outcomes will vary depending upon what that particular youngster needs based on assessment, and then in the implementation of that action towards those proficiencies is at the teacher decision level. Now, I can say that, and it sounds real easy until you get a parent that's pounding on the desk saying, I demand that my child learns under the sleep shade. And we could talk about that in the question and answer period. I think what this does is it gives us a mechanism to get where we think that child needs to go. And while the parent may insist on a particular methodology, fortunately for us, special education rules allow us to make the decision about methodology rather than the solely at the request or demand of a parent. And believe me, I'm not dissing parents at all, but I think sometimes there's a fragment of information that parents get that's influenced by other parts of ideology that don't help us get those children where they need to get. We certainly want to respect those questions, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A period.
Okay. I'm going to actually let Bill take this slide. Surprise, Bill. Because the standards, the curriculum map gives us several different levels of assessment practices. Go, Bill.
So the question came up a couple minutes ago about the impact statements, and I'm going to tell me if this is where your impact statement process comes. Does the student's vision condition adversely impact their ability to access curriculum? Is that your impact statement that you were looking for?
Yes.
Okay. So what we look at is and fortunately for us, and I believe this is an extremely valuable piece of the standards, is we're matching this at age and grade level. If you will notice as you read through the document itself, when you get it, we don't refer to level of vision. And I think there's a lot of our caseload analyses that allow us the apparent opportunity to create caseloads based on levels of vision. What I think happens in most cases is, based on that, the kids with high levels of low vision tend to be deprioritized for direct service, and the kids that have the most impacted vision were the ones that seem to get the most service. What we're saying here is there's age grade level proficiencies, that cut across all ages and grade levels. These are where we expect these children to go or to be approximately by the end of that particular age or grade level. Much the same as we would expect all children to have a certain level of proficiency in reading at the end of 5th grade. But you talk to any 5th grade teacher and you say, oh, all your kids are at 5th grade level. They'll say, no, I've got kids that are at 9th grade level. I got kids that are at 3rd grade level. But we're still targeting that proficiency at that grade level so that if there is a gap in performance, we go in and adjust instruction and adjust time, adjust methods and materials. Instructional methods is a big piece of it, but it isn't always necessarily the teacher. So we have room in there to adjust our instruction in order to move that child's proficiencies more towards that particular age and grade level. We go from standards to the benchmarks. That gives us a little more detail of a proficiency statement. Then we have performance indicators. There's an assessment for each of those, and that can come from a variety of curriculum assessments that Mary referred to a few minutes ago. The curriculum gives us the scope and sequence of what that set of skills are based on an assessment. And this is sort of a little I'll call it a soapbox, but it really needs to be more than a soapbox. The assessments that we have right now, I've yet to see one specifically for orientation and mobility that has reliability and validity studies. And if you know anything about test and measurements, the first thing you look for in a test and measurement document is the reliability and validity. Is this reliable, meaning we're going to see the same results over time? And are these skill sets that we're looking at valid for what we're looking for? We won't go into detail on that here. That's something we go into more detail when we have a longer period of time. But those are key factors, because what reliability and validity does is it makes sure that the objectives are not subjectively evaluated and there's inconsistencies in how those objectives are evaluated. Now, we do have good assessments, and I'm not saying that the assessment checklists that we have aren't good. Where the gaps begin to show is between instructors. Am I looking at a particular set of skills based on what I think they should be able to do, what I've heard they should be able to do, what I believe they should be able to do? None of those give us any reliability between raters. You have a team of people there, so you certainly have an option or an opportunity to discuss that between yourselves. But if a child leaves Kansas and goes to Wisconsin or Texas or California, the instructor in another place may not have the same level of confidence in what that student is demonstrating as you may have projected. And in a simple explanation, I use reading as a kind of a standard for core subjects. If a child has an assessment that says that that child is proficient at a 3rd grade level, you can pretty much go to any state in the country and people will know what 3rd grade reading level is. There may be a little variance within a state, but it's a pretty much a standard look at what those proficiencies are. What we're hoping then with the standards document that is now in place is that we'll use some of those assessment processes that we have to become more in line with consistency and reliability across the board, so that if a child is assessed in Florida coming to Kansas, you would have a level of confidence in what that particular child's set of skills are. Okay?
Yep. Bill, you kind of touched on this. So you want to answer that question. Are these standards going to be nationwide? Will ACVREP support and use them?
Yeah, and someone had asked that ACVREP question. If I can get a little more background into what prompted that question, then I'll be happy to answer that. In answer to the first one, yes, we hope they'll be used nationwide, because what that'll do is give us a broader base for research and continuous improvement. This is not a one-off document. Certainly we will need to continue to look at the changing needs of children and their particular learning environment. So we want to make sure the standards are going to meet those, continue to meet the outcomes that we expect. But tell me, if whoever asked that question about ACVREP, can you give me a little more background into that?
That person may not be here. I will look back.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, the question, and I will answer what the piece of the question that I think we got is ACVREP going to approve this? ACVREP is a certification body, and their job is to certify the training that teachers have, instructors have as they come into the field. They have no authority or role in approving curriculum, the development of standards, the implementation process. Much the same as every state has a certification division. That state certification division looks at the training that individuals have or would need in order to be a certified teacher in that particular state. They don't cross into curriculum and implementation and instruction. So the role ACVREP is separate from what the standards would do. What we would hope is that the standards would become part of university pre-service training. And we've heard some of that already from one of our video people. And we hope as time goes on that it would be, now that the book is published, that we'll be seeing that as more a part of an instructional process done at the pre-service level. For those of us that are in the field, what we would do then is strongly recommend it become part of professional development within that state. This is not a 30-minute or a 1-hour presentation because our field has not clearly grasped the importance of standards-based instruction. That's not a bad thing. Our field started as a rehab entity, and we sort of morphed into the schools. Well, as we morphed into the schools, now we hear this business about standards-based instruction. And O&M, although it's a related service, is also instructional because we're teaching children new sets of skills and how to adapt in order to travel safely. So we're beginning to grasp onto this standards approach, which is good because it's going to give us, as one of our video people said, a lot more credibility with our peers in schools. So now we've got a consistent basis for assessment, consistent basis for comparison between instructors. It gives us a better defined terminology. We're going to use the same terminology. And we're not looking at lockstepping anything, but we have to have some kind of consistency in terminology. Otherwise, we're going to be at a gap of information. We may have ill-defined concepts that don't help us, and if they don't help us, then they certainly wouldn't be able to help the children. Of course, it'll help us evolve as a profession in the school world. It's certainly adult services, but within the schools, that's where standards-based education came from. And keeping us in line with Gen Ed, as our video person said, when we walk into an IEP meeting and we talk about standards-based, evidence-based instruction, and those standards are research-based and evidence-based, the people in there don't need to understand the nuances of O&M, but they do understand standards-based instruction. And when we have that level of support behind the instruction that you do, it aligns us a little greater with a common knowledge about standards with our friends in general education.
So I'm not going to really go over this slide because of the time, but you will have it when I send the PowerPoint to all of you. The point is that it's not a competition between resources out there. All the curriculum checklists can be used with the standards. That's the bottom line.
Question did come. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
In the chat box, question came up, will this be aligned with the New Mexico inventory? And to the person that asked that question, I'm not the one that developed that, although thank you for that credit, but I don't take credit for it. That was done at the New Mexico school. That's a comprehensive assessment process that the skills that are in that assessment are definitely linked to the standards and the proficiency statements that are in the standards. So now we backward chained ourselves into a standards connection so that if we're using the New Mexico assessment, we could say that that's linked to and aligned with the standards.
Thank you. So this is probably what I'm most excited about, and Bill already touched on it. This is a table that's copied from the book, and it's that learner proficiency rubric. And all I can tell you at this point, without a longer explanation and a longer time, is that they're built on student performance. that's built on Bloom's taxonomy, and it's built on this progression of skills strategic framework, a part of it that I'm showing on this slide. And that was a framework that I developed myself so that I could make sure that the characteristics that we use in our teaching and in our description of student proficiency would be embedded into the proficiency levels. So for instance, we teach from simple environments to complex environments, from familiar indoor environments to unfamiliar outdoor environments, kind of shows the range. And then we know that some learners need maximum safety supervision, some are independent without the need for any supervision. So all of those characteristics are built into the proficiency rubric that we're suggesting gets used when we're evaluating students. It's also the same criteria and the same definitions that are used in the back of the book. Has in this upper left-hand corner, it shows a page from the curriculum skill set guide, curriculum development skill set guide that's in the back of the book. So this is like the TAPS, except it's aligned with the standards, and it gives the levels of proficiency in the same, using the same rubric that is used in the standards. And that is not something that I can explain any better in this short a time, but just know that when we have common vocabulary to talk about student proficiency, our profession is going to take a step up for all of us, including our students. The same definitions are also used in our, what is this, Bill?
Risk assessment matrix.
Thank you. In our risk assessment matrix, and we do a whole presentation and training on that, but I just wanted to show how once you have vocabulary that can be used to describe environments, safety supervision, personal student characteristics, it can all come together and it's all standards based. Can you clarify that at all, Bill, or should I just move on?
No, I think that's it. I think the risk assessment process clearly identifies that whole concept of safety supervision, which there's another workshop that we do on risk assessment. And it's the helpful piece is now it's not professional opinion or professional judgment of the instructor. It's judgment based on a standards-based approach that's research and evidence-based. It's intended to protect you, and I don't say protect in a negative way, but it's intended to support your determination of what that child's needs are and how that instruction needs to take place or not take place.
So we've covered a lot that's already on this slide. When you have that clearly articulated definition of learner proficiency, it's easier to report on the progress. Now, somebody asked a question about how to determine IEP goals for students with multiple disabilities. And I just have an example of resources within the book that can help you kind of figure that out. So let's say that you have a 12-year-old wheelchair user with cognitive disabilities, and you're looking at right here, the end of grade 7 in orientation and mapping. And it says, use a variety of orientation skills to orient and reorient in familiar residential areas. And you go, oh, wait a minute. This student is not ready for residential areas. So what can you do? You can look at the previous target, age target, the end of grade 3. It says, develop and apply strategies for orienting in familiar indoor and outdoor environments. You might think, well, that's what we're doing. We're inside travel, doing routes. You know, the child uses a wheelchair, so sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get through the motor planning, that sort of thing. But what kinds of things are we talking about? So then we can look into the sample student evidence for that grade level. I'm going to switch right over here to, nope, I'm going to go back here, sorry, to age 9, grade 3. And I've highlighted utilize sequential landmarks to assist with orientation. And I might think, yeah, the student could probably do more with sequencing landmarks, because sequencing is the cognitive skill associated with orientation. So what might that look like? Well, I can even go into the sample student evidence for age 4 and find what maybe some precursor skills are to that. It says use landmarks and clues to establish and maintain orientation in near space. Well, I know that my student in the wheelchair really is working with near space, so this kind of helps with that. It doesn't say to sequence landmarks, but it does say to use them. So I could maybe start pointing out some tactile or visual landmarks along the way. If I go to the sample student evidence at age 24 months, I might even get some other ideas. And highlighted, I have recognize familiar places through sensory input. You might use object cues. Anticipate activities that take place in specific locations. So that's how you can use the information in the standards to kind of go backwards to see where a student's skills are and what you might be able to target for instruction. On the next slide, it shows some of the information available about wheelchairs. Now, when you look at kids in wheelchairs, that's kind of an overlay to the orientation and mobility instruction or standards or curriculum. So there isn't a separate curriculum for kids in wheelchairs. There are separate skills, but they will still fit into the standards-based instruction. But you overlay the wheelchair travel onto the other skills that you're working on. And on the left-hand side, there's a couple of screenshots of pages in the back of the book where the curriculum planning skill set guide is. It gives you some basic skills and at what age they would be mastered. And then also there's an appendix in the book that has just tons and tons of information in it. And it's not information that I came up with, it's information that I borrowed from the resources that are already out there.
And just as a quick explanation on that skill set of if you go back to that slide, what this isn't suggesting as the orientation mobility instructor is teaching the skills of wheelchair travel. The wheelchair is a tool by which they travel. And so we're working on the orientation through that tool. We probably would be working with a physical therapist or an occupational therapist on that aspect of from the wheelchair. Just some of the other mechanics of how wheelchairs work and then what the travel capacity is with it. And we're going to use that then as a tool toward orientation. We might have to adapt the instruction because there are certain things that aren't going to apply to a wheelchair traveler that might apply to a non-wheelchair traveler. So just it's a point of understanding that there's not an expectation that we teach wheelchair travel, the use of the wheelchair. That belongs to our friends, and we do that in collaboration with our friends OT or PT.
Thank you for that. I was just about to ask about PT and the wheelchair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So there were some questions about how to get permission to use before and after school time for O&M lessons. The ethics and integrity of learners being underserved, how to get time for instruction. And I want you to hear what Kimmy has to say here.
So I started using it by right when I started doing my internship, actually. Administration was starting to crack down on when we could pull students, for how long, and where we could take them off campus. And so I asked my boss to go to the heads of all the different districts we work in and say, can we pull a meeting? Can I go to one of your directors' meetings? And can we do a presentation on what O&M is? Because it doesn't sound like they understand what it is. They're saying it's non-academic, so we can't pull them during school up. So we can't pull them after school. We can't pull them during school. You know, when am I supposed to do my job? So we got that set up. Me and my other colleagues, we went to basically the monthly meeting that all the administrators have. And I got to present with my colleagues. We did a whole, I don't know if I told you this, Mary, we did a whole PowerPoint presentation on your O&M standards. And it really helped. You know, some people tuned out as normal, but there were other administrators that, you know, they had a aha moment, you know. And from then on, we got a company car that we can now drive students in. We had a paraprofessional assigned to us so that they could drive, and we wouldn't, us as an O&M wouldn't have to worry about driving and picking up students and all this. It really saved us a lot of time so that we can see all the students on our caseload. And then the pushback just went away. I was able to say, this is the time I have available to pull this student. We're going to be working on this. And they said, okay. So many doors were opened.
All right. Bill?
I think the piece for me that became more relevant as we look at the Supreme Court case that's referenced at the bottom of that left-hand side, Andrew. What came about in that Supreme Court case is the expectation that students in special education are going to make ambitious progress toward the goals and objectives. For those of us that have been around for a long time, Mary only has 3 longs, I've got 5. We always were able to get to the end of the year, IEP year, school year, and say, well, the student has made some progress, and so that was okay. That doesn't work anymore. Supreme Court says, no, there must be ambitious progress, which means somewhere close to near approximating age or grade level expectations. There's your impact statement. Again, when you're looking at a document that talks about skill sets by age and grade level, has nothing to do with the level of vision. That's a complicating factor in this process. If we know what those children should be able to achieve by certain ages and grade levels, and we are bound to look for ambitious progress, this is going to support our work. And it's a way to explain to admins, they would understand, I would hope, the Supreme Court ruling that says that progress happens. So the impact is simply put, if someone says you can have that child for 30 minutes once a week, okay, here's the set of skills that youngster is supposed to get in order to be at or near age or grade level equivalents. There's an insufficient amount of time in 30 minutes once a week to make that happen. If that's all the IPT has, then there's no way, IP team has, there's no way for that child to get the proficiency. And notice what the language is. It's not talking about what I can or can't do. It's what that child will or will not be able to learn. Some children will learn a little bit quicker than others. We know that. That's just kids. Some will need a little bit more time. But when we look at the impact of that instruction, it's language that administrators should be able to understand. It says, in order for us to make the things that need to happen for that child, this is the amount of time that's necessary, and that doesn't happen during lunch or some other non-specified time. And I'll talk a little bit more about some complicating factors when we get done.
the other special ed administrators for the school districts that we serve. So I work for a
There we go. There we go. When we talk about, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. When we talk about getting administrators on board, sometimes they are influenced by seeing how O&M aligns with gen ed curriculum. And here's just an example. I'm not going to go through it, but an example of what I did to make sure that I knew how O&M overlapped or overlaid with business, math, language arts, science, and social studies. I did all this alignment for that. You can do it too. Okay. Working with families for age appropriate skills. This says it all.
I work in a few districts that are very affluent. And those parents, I can give you one example. I was just in an IEP a few weeks ago. And, you know, with COVID and everything's been virtual, right? So this father was saying, well, my daughter, you know, thank you for your O&M input, but I want to hold off right now. I don't think it's important. And she's in 10th grade. He goes, I really want her to focus on other academics, is what he said. And so I held off until the meeting. I brought in, and it wasn't a triennial year or anything. So I just put everything into the actual present levels of performance. And I copied and pasted the actual standard and the skills that she needed. And then I highlighted the skills she had and then left it like unhighlighted the skills that she still needed to learn. And I said, your daughter is college bound in 2 years. You want her to go to college without being able to have these skills, you know? And it was very eye-opening for him. He was like, oh, I didn't understand that's what you guys worked on. And I was like, yeah, now you do. Because now it's research-based, right? It's not just this thing that's up in the air. I work in a few.
Here we go. And one of the last questions that we're going to address is how to help students see that. I can't read that. Sorry. Bill, will you read that? Whoops.
Whoops. See their need for the cane and how their own independence is important in front of their peers rather than hiding their independence.
And I would just say that that's one of the reasons that I wrote these books. Because students with visual impairments, blind kids, kids who use canes, they deserve to see themselves represented in literature. And I have heard from teachers who have used these books that their student has had an emotional reaction, but also a positive reaction to using the cane. So I just offer that as a possibility. Bill.
So in order to bring this to an implementation level, and we talked a little bit about this before our meeting, is that we would do on-site trainings. That's a possibility. What we do then is go through all of the standards. We actually get into IEPs that you have or might have and look at how to make those work so that you have some practical application of what the standards have to offer in terms of the enhancement of our educational practices. In addition to that, we've mentioned a couple other aspects that go along with this. One is the risk assessment process, which we believe is very important, as well as how do we determine instructional minutes that go along with that recommendation for services. And here's a sample sheet that shows it's basically a set of skills that one would expect, and they're representative skills. Again, this is not a comprehensive list of skills, but a representative set of skills. For example, at 0 to 3, what kinds of things would we expect to see youngsters acquire, demonstrate, and generalize as much as a 3-year-old can generalize? And then what would be a range of time, again, this is evidence-based, that would be appropriate for us to begin instruction in that area. Understanding that 0 to 3 is early childhood. There's a lot of family involvement that happens at that point. Once we get to the 3 to 5, now we're starting to look at more student and learner centered, and we have the same set of skill sets that would be globally associated with age 3 to 5. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's clearly representative. And so what kind of times would we begin to recommend for O&M for that set of children? And that's what the range shows you, anywhere from 2 times a week all the way up to 3 times a week, and longer periods of time. Those things can be a real valuable tool. If we look back at the impact statement, that can show what the expectations are on one page, depending upon the age of the child, what's expected for that child to learn. Absent properly identified and scheduled instruction, we're not going to make that ambitious progress that we're hoping for. So in terms of standards, and again, this is new language for our field, and we're hoping that it's going to catch on. It seems to have. Standards give us ultimate outcomes. What do we expect that youngster to have by the time they finish high school? They're measured against a valid assessment of proficiency. There is a set of standards that say, by the time you are at 12th grade or graduation, this is a set of skills that you should have. They give us a way to identify and articulate that as instructors. So then we have some level of credibility through an organized framework and a sequence that gets us to the point of instruction for those children to demonstrate that set of skills. It also allows us to monitor aspects of instruction. What are our methods? How much time? What's the location of materials? Same way a general ed classroom teacher monitors the instruction and monitors student performance over the course of a week, 6 weeks, a semester, over the course of the year, so that they can adjust and adapt the instruction to make sure that those children are getting the instruction that they need. That gives us a way to adjust our instruction. So many times, and that's not your group particularly, I've seen that instructors who, I'll just measure that at semester and at the end of the year. That's not giving us time to formally look at, are we adjusting our instruction in such a way that we can make that ambitious progress by the end of the year. It gives us a level of accountability for students, but also for teachers, administrators, as was my case as a principal. And then it allows me as an administrator to do targeted professional development. So there's a whole picture here that we have, that standards give us a more solid basis for our profession and as it continues its development.
Woo. We
go.
talked your ear off, people. We are willing to come back to another meeting and have more of a chat rather than a presentation, because as you think about this, as you get your books, you might have other kinds of questions. So
Yes,
I'm sorry.
that's a really good idea. And we are having our statewide vision symposium next Friday. And so we will be touching on the book. We're going to have a session called Hot Topics in O&M, where people can just talk about whatever they want to, but we will address this. So then maybe the week after we could do the Q&A session.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, we'll send an email and we'll check our calendars just to make sure.
Yes.
And we can get back to you. What I wanted to say is, yes, the book is available from Austin Macaulay Publishers. You will notice this is the first edition, and I say that because the second edition will actually have page numbers on the pages that have tables, which was, I cried. Okay, I cried when I saw that, because this has been 2 years. If you go to publish something, do not use the same publisher I used, please. But anyway, the next version should have page numbers. Otherwise, you put the page numbers in yourself, and you can even tab it like I've tabbed my different sections here to make it easier to use.
The logo for the Kansas State School for the Blind, a flying blue eagle in the center of a red and yellow sunflower. Fade to black.